Hi, I'm Charlotte. My father looked me in the eyes before church and said, "You're just a tenant here." No anger, no hesitation, just a quiet sentence that shattered decades of loyalty. They'd already stripped my name from the trust, rewrote my contributions, and built a family empire on my silence. Now I'm watching them spin lies in podcasts, claim I walked away while they plan to erase me. But what they didn't know, I never stopped keeping the receipts. So, what would you do if your own family tried to delete you from your life? Sunday mornings in the Boone household always had the same rhythm: the clink of china, the slow hum of gospel music playing from the old radio, and the faint scent of polished wood mingling with brewed coffee. I stood by the stove, stirring milk into my father's cup. 2%, no sugar, just the way he liked it. My fingers moved from memory, not affection. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It was the kind of silence you learn to live with, where every word is measured and most things are left unsaid. We all moved in routines, like dancers locked in a choreography that hadn't changed in years. My sister Alzina was already in the sunroom, legs crossed, checking her lipstick and her phone's front camera. She had the look of someone who belonged. I, on the other hand, had started feeling like a guest, like I was standing on a welcome mat that had been quietly pulled halfway out. I carried my father's coffee to the table, placed it at his spot, and took my seat across from him. He was reading the Sunday paper, glasses low on his nose, and didn't even look up when he spoke. "You're just a tenant here, Charlotte. Don't make long-term plans." He said it the way people comment about the weather: flat, indifferent, inevitable. The newspaper rustled as he turned the page. Alzina didn't flinch, didn't blink. A smirk curled at the corner of her mouth before she took a slow sip from her mug. I stared at him, my mind blank for a split second. Then I blinked, nodded once, and reached for the butter. If I'd reacted, it would have given him more power. Instead, I stored the words somewhere cold. Tenant. I had refinished the floors in this house myself, painted the window frames, paid for the plumbing when the pipes burst 2 winters ago. But sure, I was just a tenant now. No one said anything else. The silence wrapped around the table like a second tablecloth. This one made of old wounds and things we all knew, but never said aloud. I chewed slowly, swallowed harder. Not the food, but the reality. No one had defended me. Not my father. Not Alzana. Not even the walls that I'd helped rebuild. That sentence didn't just sting. It rearranged the air in the room. My position in this family had always been undefined, but that morning he had written it in ink. After breakfast, the day moved forward as if nothing had been said. Everyone moved with robotic efficiency, dressing up, brushing shoes, reapplying lipstick. We were headed to church, after all, where appearances mattered more than truths. I paused on the way to grab my coat from the hallway. My hand stopped mid-reach. The photo. It was gone. Right above the staircase, for over a decade, had hung a picture of my mother, Mirella, in a powder blue dress, her hand gently resting on my shoulder when I was 8. It had been our anchor in this house. Now, just an empty wall, a faint square of dustless space marking where the frame had been. I looked around. No one noticed. No one cared. No one said a word about its absence. I didn't ask. The question wouldn't bring her back. It wouldn't change what it meant. As we drove to church, I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, my stomach twisting in a way that had nothing to do with hunger. In church, we took our regular pew. Alzina sat in front of me, smiling politely at parishioners who greeted her. My father nodded along with the sermon. I stared at the stained glass window, the sun catching bits of color that shimmered across my lap. The pastor's voice rang out. "Honor your family and the home you were given." I almost laughed. What home? What honor? If I was a tenant, then I was renting air, leasing space in memories no one else kept. Alzina leaned in toward the pastor during the closing hymn, whispered something with that same performative warmth she wore like perfume. I caught the glance he gave me afterward, a mixture of sympathy and polite dismissal. When the service ended, I made an excuse about needing to prep something for the upcoming board meeting and walked back alone. The air was cool, the streets empty. I passed by the front porch of our house, the one I had spent 4 weekends rebuilding last fall. My hands remembered every nail I had driven into that wood. I walked slower now, not out of exhaustion, but awareness. Flashbacks played behind my eyes. My father handing me a hammer when I was 12, teaching me how to hold it, how to build something that lasts. Except, apparently, my presence didn't qualify. Back inside my room, I kicked off my shoes, changed into jeans, and opened the storage chest at the foot of my bed. It had been untouched for months. Inside, dusty folders, manila envelopes, and a few faded photographs. I pulled out one file, one I hadn't looked at in years, my name, my signature, dated 5 years ago. A document I barely remembered signing, trusting my father when he said, "Just standard family paperwork, Charlotte, nothing to worry about." I held it to the light, scanning every line now with the eyes of a woman who'd been erased. I didn't feel fear, I felt awake. I woke earlier than usual, not because I had anywhere pressing to be, but because sleep had no intention of staying. The house felt colder, although the thermostat hadn't moved. I moved through the hallway as if walking through someone else's home. The photo of Mom was still missing. The nail it had hung from had been removed entirely, leaving nothing but a faint square on the wall where her memory had once lived. Downstairs, I poured myself a cup of black coffee. My father had already left for his morning walk, and the quiet that filled the room was heavy, not peaceful. I scanned the living room. Pillows were rearranged, a side table gone, and a new painting now hung in the place where I used to display a restoration award. I never got a call about that. It struck me, not all erasure is dramatic. Sometimes it's not a bonfire, just a slow reorganization of reality. One item moved, one name removed, one memory no longer spoken aloud. I sat in the kitchen with my coffee and thought, being hated is visible. At least then you know where you stand. But to be erased silently, methodically, that's colder than contempt. It's pretending you were never there at all. Around mid-morning, I found myself in the garden, brushing off leaves from the small herb planters I'd built last year. Uncle Honora arrived through the side gate, carrying a brown paper bag with his usual weekend pastries. He was the only one who still knocked before entering the kitchen. "Thought I'd catch you before the day swallowed us both," he said, placing the bag down. We settled at the back porch with our coffee and the warm scent of apple turnovers between us. Our conversation wandered, as it always did, until he leaned in, lowering his voice. "You know," he said, "I still remember that corner beam you fixed. Morella bragged about it for weeks." My heart softened. I could almost hear Mom's voice saying, "Charlotte doesn't just patch things." "And she restores," he continued. "There was something I came across years ago, a document from the trust. Your name was—" "Oh, telling war stories again, Uncle?" Alzina's voice cut through the air like a blade dipped in honey. She appeared out of nowhere, perfectly dressed for nowhere in particular. Her tone was playful, but her eyes were cold. "Charlotte's moved on, right?" she added, smiling as if we were all part of some inside joke. Honora withdrew instantly, nodding politely. The moment shriveled like a flower under frost. I said nothing. She knew what she was doing. And I knew the pattern: interrupt, redirect, deflect. Later that day, I attended the charity luncheon hosted by the Family Foundation. I was listed on the planning committee, but you'd never have known it by how I was welcomed. "Charlotte DeWitt?" the check-in volunteer asked, scrolling through a tablet. "Ah, here you are." She handed me a name tag that read, "Charlotte DeWitt, Property Advisor, External." I blinked. External? Alzina's name tag, by contrast, read, Alzina Crow, Executive Family Partner. Before I could respond, a young woman behind the booth leaned in and asked, "Are you with the managing family or more of a consultant role?" I smiled, tight, controlled. "I helped build what you're standing in," I said, tilting my head toward the event hall. Her smile remained pleasant, but it dimmed with uncertainty. She clearly didn't know what to do with that information. No one ever does when the truth doesn't fit the narrative. As the afternoon wore on, the pattern became clearer. Alzina moved through the room like a host of her own wedding. She posed for photos, gave interviews to small local outlets, and in her speech spoke about visionary women in our lineage who laid this foundation. She never once said my name. I was seated at a table near the back with a mix of interns and a retiree from accounting, no family members in sight. During dessert, one of the older guests leaned over and whispered, "Didn't you used to run this foundation?" I smiled, this time a bit wider. Some people run it, others just built the foundation. And just like that, the room didn't seem so full anymore. I didn't feel invisible. I felt misrepresented, which somehow felt worse. Back home, the air felt thinner. I moved through the living room and into my old office, a room that had slowly turned into storage over the years. I opened a drawer I hadn't touched in a long time. Inside were original renovation contracts, blueprints I drafted, and invoices addressed to me, with my signature still fresh in the ink. I picked up one of the thicker folders, ran my fingers along the edges, and slipped it into my purse. If they wanted to forget, I'd make sure the record remembered. By Wednesday afternoon, the house had already grown smaller around me, not in square footage, but in meaning. I moved through it like someone retracing footsteps in a home tour, not sure if I belonged, or if I was simply observing a space staged for someone else. I spent most of the afternoon sorting through old files in the home office, not because I had a plan, but because my instincts kept tapping on the back of my mind like a ticking clock. Drawer after drawer revealed documents once filed under Ownership Renovations, CD, now recategorized as miscellaneous. Even my handwriting, once in bold black ink, now sat buried under layers of newly labeled folders. It was quiet. Too quiet. No staff. No footsteps overhead. Only the rustle of old paper and the slow rise of a knot in my stomach. This wasn't passive neglect. This was a system, cold and deliberate. I pulled out one binder and flipped through the pages. Every project I had led, dates, plans, approvals, all moved. Not deleted, just reclassified until they no longer looked like mine. I remembered something Araminta once told me in passing, back when she was still clerking for a small firm and debating law school. If it's not on paper, it doesn't exist in court. At the time, it felt like a lawyer's cynicism. Now, it sounded like a warning I should have taken seriously. And then I found the wills. 2 versions. The first was a draft from 7 years ago, with clear language. Charlotte DeWitt shall retain 50% ownership of the estate known as DeWitt Hill, including assets AG. I didn't recognize the lawyer's name, but the format looked official. The second document had today's date handwritten on the post-it stuck to the top corner. No Charlotte. Nowhere. Instead, a newly added clause named Alzina Crow, sole successor and operating manager of Boone DeWitt Assets, LLC. My hands didn't shake out of surprise. They trembled because of clarity. The kind of clarity that doesn't come like a thunderclap, but creeps in, builds slowly, and then lands like concrete. A father doesn't forget a daughter, not unless he wants the world to forget her too. I scanned both documents, saved copies to 3 different drives, and emailed backups to myself under an alias I created that morning. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. I didn't feel betrayed. I felt insulted. And that was worse. I didn't confront him. Not yet. There was no strength in shouting at a wall that's already been rebuilt without your bricks. I needed more, so I turned to what no one else in the house ever bothered to open. Mom's old trunk. It sat in the corner of her sewing room, covered by a linen throw. I hadn't touched it since she died. It wasn't locked, but the hinges creaked with protest when I opened it. Fabric samples, recipe cards, and at the bottom, her old Motorola flip phone. I didn't expect it to turn on, but when I plugged it in and waited, it blinked to life. One unread message. Don't let them replace you. You hold the bones of this house. I stared at those words for minutes. I didn't cry. I read them again and again. And then I remembered her voice after my failed speech in high school, when I stood there shaking while the auditorium blinked back at me. Even when they don't clap, she whispered in my ear, you still delivered the truth. I wrote the message down in my notebook. right next to my running list of every contribution I had made to the estate. 5 properties restored, 2 sold under my recommendation, 3 grant proposals I wrote to secure tax exemptions. No one remembered them at family dinners, but the paperwork still did. By evening, I had created an entire timeline: dates, files, scanned invoices, and side notes of conversations. What began as a memory lane quickly turned into a legal roadmap. I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a stakeholder being pushed out of her own holdings. I started watching videos, quiet ones, legal analysts breaking down cases where women were cut out of inheritance structures after serving as silent contributors. Equitable estoppel, constructive trust, undue influence. Words that once felt theoretical now felt personal. If this were any other family, I wrote in my journal, I'd be suing them already, but this is mine, for now. A ping on my phone jolted me. A friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in weeks, had texted, "Hey, just got the Foundation's annual report in the mail. Your name's not listed under founding members. Was that intentional?" I froze. I typed back, "Thanks for letting me know." I didn't need to say more. The realization set in. They weren't just hiding me from their world. They were rewriting the story before I could reclaim my paragraph. I dialed Araminta's number. Let it ring once. Hung up. There wasn't anything I needed to say. Not yet. I just needed to remind myself that the lifeline was still there, waiting. Back in my room, I locked the door and turned on the small desk lamp. I gathered the copies, the old will, the text from Mom, and the renovation blueprints with my initials. I placed them in a new folder, labeled it with a red tab, and locked it in the drawer that no one else knew existed. I caught my reflection in the mirror. Not the girl from 2 years ago, hoping for praise. Not even the woman from 2 days ago, shocked by a single sentence over toast. If I don't exist in their world, I said quietly, I'll build a world where they need me to. Then I picked up my phone and dialed the bank. It started with the file labeled Refinance 2018. I wasn't even looking for it. I'd pulled out the drawer to cross-check an invoice and saw my handwriting on the tab, a detail that should have offered comfort. Instead, the date stuck out like a splinter. I flipped it open and scanned the top of the first page. Charlotte DeWitt, non-owner co-signer. I reread the line. Non-owner. I flipped through the rest of the pages, confusion turning slowly into realization. 5 years ago, when Dad had called me into his office and passed me a folder to sign, I hadn't questioned it. He'd said it was a routine update for the estate. Something about aligning loan documents. I trusted him, the way a daughter's supposed to. But this? This wasn't a harmless update. This was paperwork that had quietly downgraded my legal standing. My signature was on every page. I had signed away my place, my protections, without even realizing it. The implications weren't just technical. They were deliberate. That evening, I walked into the family office where Dad and Alzina were reviewing documents, probably preparing for another foundation gala or property pitch. They didn't look up when I entered. I dropped the file on the desk between them, calm, controlled. "This is what silence gets you," I said. "But not anymore." Marcellus finally looked up from his reading glasses. "Charlotte, what's this?" Alzina barely raised an eyebrow. "You signed that years ago. It's just for streamlining paperwork. We had to reorganize things to keep operations clean." "I see," I said. "So I'm not part of the family business. I'm just a name you needed to process a loan and then set aside?" Marcellus leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "No one said that. Don't be dramatic." "Actually," I said, my voice firm, "you did, last Sunday, over toast." His mouth pressed into a line. I looked between them. "If I'm just a tenant, I'll start acting like someone with a lease and clauses." Neither of them replied. I didn't need them to. I turned and walked out without waiting for more explanations. Later that night, I attended a networking mixer co-hosted by the Crow DeWitt Family Foundation. I'd been listed as a co-presenter in the original announcement weeks ago. But when I arrived at check-in, the volunteer looked puzzled, scrolling through her iPad. "I'm sorry," she said. "We don't have you listed under the speakers. Are you with the setup team?" I blinked once. then smiled tightly. Just here to observe. She handed me a generic guest badge. No title, no role, no trace of everything I'd built for them. Inside, I watched as Alzina took the stage, introduced as the sole founder of the firm's new real estate initiative. She wore confidence like it was tailored. The audience clapped. Some even stood. I stood too, quietly, in the back, with my name tag that might as well have said nobody. But I remembered who had written the first pitch for this initiative, who had walked the original lots in the rain, who had cold-called the grant boards. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to remember who stood by while they rewrote the story. After the event, I returned home, poured myself a glass of water, and stood in front of the hallway mirror. I repeated aloud the words they'd fed me over the past 2 weeks. External advisor. Just a co-signer. Tenant. Each one landed differently when I said it myself. They weren't just labels, they were weapons, used in quiet, polished conversations to carve me out. Who am I to this house? I asked my reflection. A pause. Then, with more clarity than I'd spoken in days, I answered, the one who will outlast it. At 10:45 that night, I sat at my desk. I didn't get up until 3 in the morning. I pulled every document tied to my name, bills I paid, designs I submitted, repair work I supervised. I created a spreadsheet cataloging it all. The date, the nature of work, the outcome, whose name appeared on the public credit and whose didn't. Then I opened a blank Word doc titled Asset Migration, Independent Trust Proposal. I wrote point by point which assets I needed to extract, which partnerships had to be dissolved, what legal grounds I could cite based on undue influence and passive coercion. I wasn't preparing to leave. I was building an exit I could own. Just after dawn broke, my phone buzzed. A delivery had been dropped at the front door. Curious, I stepped out in my robe and saw a tall floral arrangement, elegant but generic. Lilies, roses, eucalyptus leaves. No note, just a small tag. Thank you for your quiet support from the new legacy. I stared at it. They weren't just pushing me out anymore. They were celebrating. I took a picture of the flowers, and then I blocked the number attached to the delivery and walked inside. I opened my inbox, typed one sentence, and hit send. We need to talk. Bring legal. The parking lot outside the gala was already full when I pulled in, headlights catching on black tie elegance and valet attendants rushing between cars. I sat in my car for a moment, pressing my palms against the steering wheel. The dress I wore tonight was one my mother had designed for me before her diagnosis, a midnight blue silk with a subtle embroidery along the waist. She had said it made me look like I belonged in a room full of people who thought they were important. As I stepped inside, the lobby gleamed under chandeliers that reminded me of polished teeth, bright, cold, ready to bite. A massive banner draped across the entrance read, The Boone Crow Legacy, Generations of Excellence. Underneath were photos of properties, milestones, family members in golden frames. My name wasn't there, not even in fine print. I paused at the edge of the hallway, taking it in. 7 out of 10 of the buildings in that banner had my designs, my sweat, my grant writing behind them. And yet, here I stood, erased like pencil from a legal draft. Tonight, they celebrated a history I built without leaving fingerprints. Inside the grand hall, rows of white-draped tables circled a stage lit with warm spotlights. I found my seat tucked in the far back near the kitchen entrance. Of course. As the presentation began, Alzina took the stage with the confidence of a woman who had never been questioned. Her smile was rehearsed, her tone dipped in flattery, her cadence as practiced as a political pitch. We stand on the shoulders of visionary women, she declared. Women who paved the way for growth, elegance, and excellence. A slideshow followed, estate photos, blueprints, charity events. I recognized every project. My handwriting was visible in the blueprints, my sketches, my interiors, my input. But not once, did she say my name. The audience clapped at each slide, a polite, controlled wave of applause. I didn't move. A man at my table, an older mentor from years ago, leaned toward me and asked quietly, "Didn't you develop that lake property, the one with the stone terrace?" I turned to him, smiled with restraint. Apparently, I also disappeared somewhere in the renovation. He blinked, then looked down at his plate. What else could he say? When the QA portion opened, the microphone stood alone at the center of the aisle. I hadn't planned to speak, but my legs did the thinking for me. I stood, walked forward, picked up the mic with both hands. I'd like to thank the hosts for tonight's event, I began, voice calm but not soft. It's always humbling to reflect on legacies. There are houses you build with nails, and then there are legacies built with silence. I carried both. The room hushed. Alzina's smile faltered for the first time all evening. Marcellus, seated near the front, leaned back with folded arms. I won't name names, I continued, but I'll speak truths. The Crosswinds Project. Proposed July 2016. Funding approved in October. Groundbreaking December. The terrace design wasn't original. It was salvaged from a rejected pitch I made 2 years prior. A ripple moved through the room, people shifting, glancing, whispers rising and falling. If you erase a name, don't be surprised when that name writes itself back in ink. I returned the mic and walked back to my seat. The room didn't clap. It breathed. Back at the table, I sat down. Conversations dimmed to awkward sips and forced smiles. I felt eyes on me, some curious, others judgmental. A few minutes passed before Alzina approached. She held a flute of champagne with a grip tighter than her smirk. "Bold speech," she said. "Not your usual style." "Neither is lying," I replied. "But it seems we're all evolving." She tilted her head. "People don't respond well to confrontation, Charlotte." "Good thing I wasn't asking for their permission." She didn't reply. Just turned and walked off. Later, Marcellus raised his glass for a closing toast. He didn't mention me, not even indirectly. He spoke of legacy, of teamwork, of resilience through unity, but never addressed the rupture he helped engineer. As he spoke, I noticed Alzina's hand shaking just slightly as she lifted her glass, a crack in the crystal, not enough to shatter, but enough to know it had been weakened. Back home, I slipped out of the gown, hung it carefully in the closet, and sat at my desk. My laptop pinged with a bank alert. Ownership transfer confirmed. The estate trust that had once been ours was now listed under 2 names, Marcellus Boone and Alzina Crow. No mention of mine. This wasn't panic. This was confirmation. I screenshot the transaction log, emailed Araminta. Full asset audit needed. Starting Monday. Then I got up and walked into the hallway. One of the houses we'd refurbished last year stood at the edge of the estate. I went there, barefoot, keys in hand, lights dimmed. The air smelled of cedar and fresh plaster. I pressed my hand against the beam I had installed myself. They thought this was the finale. It was just my opening act. The knock came just before noon. I wasn't expecting anyone, but the timing was too clean to be coincidental. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a navy blazer, courier badge clipped to his lapel. He handed me a flat envelope, the kind with reinforced edges. No return address. The weight in my stomach told me exactly who it was from before I opened it. Inside, I found a letter from Saren Blackwood, Marcellus's personal attorney. Notice of property management realignment. The phrasing was surgical. Effective immediately, I was to vacate the premises, my portion of the Boone estate, by the end of the quarter. There was no explanation, no apology, not even a pretense of civility. Just legal jargon meant to feel like an administrative shuffle, when in fact, it was an eviction. Signed, stamped, dated. As if it were a formality to erase me from a space I'd helped create. I sat in the dining room with the letter in my lap for nearly an hour. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I scanned it into my drive, made 2 hard copies, and slid one into a folder marked Active Litigation. If they wanted to turn this into a legal war, I would not come unarmed. Later that afternoon, I dug into the trust documents Marcellus had drawn up years ago. At the time, he called them temporary formalities. He asked for my trust, and I gave it without reading every word. I had believed his voice over my own instinct. As I flipped through the paperwork now, I saw the amendment, clear as day. 3 months ago, silently, efficiently, the LLC had been restructured. My name had been removed as a managing member. Alzina's name had taken its place, now labeled full acting stakeholder. They didn't forget me, they replaced me. I saved screenshots, printed every modified page, and began assembling a timeline. This wasn't sloppy. It wasn't accidental. It was coordinated. Quietly built behind doors I thought were locked only to outsiders. I called Araminta. She picked up on the first ring. I was expecting this, she said before I even spoke. I need to build something airtight, I told her. We're not just going to patch this, she replied. We're going to lay a new foundation. By the end of our call, we'd decided on 3 things: create a separate trust for my assets only, begin a forensic review of every LLC amendment made in the past 18 months, and initiate a legal hold on all transactions involving property I directly invested in. Don't confront them, she said. Let them get comfortable. Let them keep thinking they've won. Until we pull the rug, she said, and I could almost hear her smile. That evening, I drove to the county courthouse and pulled every public deed, every renovation permit, every ownership filing linked to the properties I had touched. I found records with my name, permits approved under my license, tax credits claimed based on my labor. Emails followed. Ones where Marcellus thanked me for taking the lead on design approvals. One thread where Alzina referred to me as the backbone of the last tax cycle. I printed them all. I didn't need praise now. I needed proof. I didn't need a key to the house, I muttered to myself. I held the original blueprint. When I got home, the front gate was open. Cars lined the driveway, and from the kitchen window, I saw a spread of hors d'oeuvres and guests clinking glasses. Brunch. No one had told me. Marcellus was talking to a senator's aide near the fireplace. Alzina posed for a photo, champagne raised, shoulder tilted just enough for the camera. I didn't walk through the party. I walked past it. Upstairs, I entered my office, closed the door, and pulled open the laptop. Through the blinds, I could see Alzina smiling at a man who, 2 years ago, had called me the sharpest strategist he'd ever met. Now he stood next to her, laughing like I never existed. They believed control came from visibility, but I had learned real control was buried in the details. Paper trails, structure, compliance. By evening, I had a full index of assets, emails, deeds, and revisions. The dossier was heavy, solid, ready. Around 10 p.m., as I poured myself a glass of red wine, my phone buzzed. It was a message from my bank representative. There has been a request to transfer remaining joint funds to an alternate LLC account. I stared at it for a moment. They were still moving, still trying to gut me financially before I could react. I placed the glass down, typed my reply. Place immediate hold. Legal challenge in motion. And just like that, I stopped reacting. I started retaliating. It started with a text. Short, informal, and oddly timed. Hey, everything okay over there? Saw something weird come across our internal board. It was from a colleague at one of the real estate firms we'd partnered with years ago. She and I hadn't spoken much lately, but the concern in her words was unmistakable. My fingers hovered over my phone for a second before I replied, "What did you see?" A few minutes passed, and then a screenshot arrived. An email, unsigned, sent anonymously through a company-wide notice list. Charlotte DeWitt is transitioning out of the Boone family structure. All future communications regarding the foundation, investments, and assets should be directed to Alzina Crow. Beneath it, another screenshot. A cropped photo of me at a coffee shop, hair in a messy bun, glasses on, wearing an old gray hoodie. The caption, "No longer involved." I didn't gasp. I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen until my eyes burned. They had officially started the quiet removal, not only in paperwork, but in public perception. Don't gasp, I told myself. Document. By the time I finished saving the images to my evidence folder, the sting had started to fade into something else. Focus. But that wasn't the end of it. Later that evening, as I sat at my desk sifting through yet another round of estate records, I began digging into online mentions of my name. LinkedIn, realtor platforms, press releases, gone. My name had been scraped from multiple articles, bios, and author credits. Properties I'd shepherded from blueprint to ribbon cutting were now listed as Alcina's spearheaded achievements. Even a quote I'd once given in an interview was now labeled as family leadership commentary. I cross-referenced every single claim with my own documents, proposal dates, contract approvals, emails with timestamps, proof. They hadn't stolen money. They'd stolen my work, my identity, the hours no one saw. The nights I spent reviewing blueprints, lobbying zoning committees, training interns who now reported to Alzina. The deadliest theft isn't always the wallet, it's the credit. That night, I began building my counterattack. Not loud, not angry, just true. I opened a blank spreadsheet and titled it, Public Timeline, Contributions. Line by line, I detailed every project, date, invoice, role, and contribution. I added scanned permits, check images, city approvals. If they were going to write me out of the narrative, I would write myself back in, fact by fact. And then, a call I didn't expect. Sidra Finch, our former family accountant. She hadn't worked with us in years, having retired early after a back injury. She was sharp, loyal to my mother, and quiet, someone who rarely inserted herself in family matters. But that evening, her name lit up my screen. "I heard what's going on," she said, voice low. "And I still have backup records." We met at a corner cafe off Main Street the next morning. She wore oversized sunglasses and carried 2 flash drives in a small leather clutch. "These are copies of invoices with your name as approving manager," she said, sliding them across the table. "There are emails, too. Marcellus and Alzena, planning the restructuring of the LLC before you were even told." I looked at her, surprised. "You kept all this?" "I kept everything that smelled off," she replied. "Your mother once told me to protect the paper. So I did." I didn't cry. I squeezed her hand and whispered, "Thank you." Then I went home and got to work. That night, I called Araminta. "I've got everything," I told her. "Emails, photo edits, fake public statements, forged filing timelines." Araminta's voice was steady. "They made this public. Now we make it permanent." We laid out our plan, issue a cease and desist for false representation, prepare a civil suit for reputational harm, and file a quiet complaint to the state bar regarding fiduciary manipulation and non-disclosure in an active LLC. "Timing," Araminta reminded me. "Too early, and they'll pivot. Too late, and they'll destroy evidence." "I'll give them rope," I said. "Then we'll pull." "You're sure?" "I'm done being sure. I'm acting." I hung up and opened a new document. Statement of Record, Charlotte DeWitt. This wasn't a press release. It wasn't a letter. It was a fact sheet. A wall they couldn't knock down with a smile or an edited headline. At midnight, my laptop pinged. Shared cloud access, revoked. Admin rights, removed by Alzina Crow. I stared at the screen. Then I smiled. Not because it hurt, but because it was too late. I'd already downloaded everything yesterday. The envelope was heavier than it looked, not in weight, but in meaning. It arrived via certified courier, addressed to me directly, though I didn't need to read the return address to know who had sent it. I tore the seal and unfolded the first page, my eyes landing on a header that confirmed everything I'd feared. Boone Family Trust, legal filing, motion to remove Charlotte DeWitt as managing party. The language was sanitized, but it cut like glass. It stated that I had never held formal authority over any property decisions or managerial rights, that my participation was informal, familial in nature, and not legally binding. The motion was signed by my father, Marcellus Boone, and backed by his personal affidavit. I stared at the lines under dim light in my kitchen. I wasn't shocked, just numb. This wasn't neglect anymore. This was intention. This was war with a paper trail. "They're not even pretending anymore," I whispered to no one. I pushed the documents aside and walked to the window. The house was quiet, but not in a peaceful way. It felt staged, like they were waiting for my next move. The following morning, my phone buzzed with a link from an old client. The message simply read, "Thought you should see this." It was a local podcast, one that covered real estate trends and philanthropy gossip. I hesitated, but curiosity won. The hosts introduced a special conversation with legacy visionaries Marcellus Boone and Alzina Crowe. Marcellus, smooth as ever, spoke about family vision. We've always tried to create a structure where every family member contributes in their own way. Of course, some step back, pursue other paths. Alzina chimed in, her voice sweet, too measured. When others step away, someone has to keep it moving forward. I was proud to step up. They didn't name me, they didn't have to. The insinuation was surgical. Charlotte abandoned the family. Charlotte chose career over legacy. Charlotte was difficult, and just like that, the online space took over. Comments flooded in. Hashtags like hashtag entitled heiress and hashtag legacy leader trended under Alzina's name. I turned off my phone, not because I couldn't take it, but because I needed silence to think. 2 days later, I received an invitation from Marcellus. Family estate alignment dinner. The wording was corporate, as if this were a quarterly check-in instead of a battlefield. I almost declined, almost. But then I remembered what Araminta had said last week. Don't defend, dismantle. That evening, I arrived last. The dining room had been transformed. Long mahogany table, crystal place settings, legal folders discreetly stacked near Dad's elbow. Alzina sat at the head of the table like she was born there. No one greeted me. No one used my name. Marcellus opened the night with a toast. To legacy, to unity, to family built on aligned vision. I let him finish. Then I leaned forward, placed my hand calmly on the edge of the table, and said, "You mean the plan where I'm erased?" The silence cracked like glass under pressure. Alzina sighed, already rehearsed. "Charlotte, this is not the time for drama." I pulled out a folder and slid it across the table. Inside, IRS filings, property deeds, city permits with my signature. This isn't drama. This is proof. I didn't inherit this name. I built it, and I brought receipts. The tension escalated. Voices rose. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed. Marcellus didn't flinch. He narrowed his eyes instead. "You were always too difficult to trust," he snapped. I smiled, small and sharp. "No, I was too hard to control." I stood slowly and addressed the entire table. As of yesterday, I've begun legal proceedings to fully separate my financial and asset holdings from the Boone estate. Any continued misrepresentation will be handled through defamation litigation. A beat of silence. No one moved. And then, unexpectedly, a slow clap from the far end of the table. I didn't look to see who it was. Someone had understood. I walked out. Didn't slam the door. Didn't raise my voice. My exit was the power. Outside, the air was thick. I got into my car, started the engine, and as I pulled out of the driveway, my phone pinged. One new notification. Counterfiling received from Boone Trust. Motion to freeze Charlotte DeWitt's access pending review. I stared at the screen for a moment. My jaw locked. I texted Araminta one line. "They want war. Let's give them a courtroom." The guest house porch was quiet except for the occasional hum of passing cars. I sat cross-legged with a cup of black coffee in one hand and Araminta's email printed in the other. The legal team had worked through the night, and the documentation they compiled was meticulous. Ownership details, tax filings, approval timestamps, nothing emotional, just cold, hard facts. I leaned back in the creaky chair, watching sunlight push through the trees. Today wasn't about pain anymore. It was about precision, about doing what I should have done years ago, cut clean instead of bleeding quietly. I backed up everything, to encrypted drives, to cloud storage under 3 fake aliases. I even mailed copies to myself, sealed and notarized. You learn these tricks fast when your family builds a legacy on paper, but guts yours in silence. My laptop sat open beside me, cursor blinking on a drafted public statement. It was nearly done. No pleading, no bitterness, just truth. That's when Cedra called. "I've got something," she said, without preamble. 15 minutes later, she pulled up in her dented Toyota and stepped out with 2 file boxes. I helped her carry them into the small dining area. Her hands trembled a little. Age or nerves, I wasn't sure. They didn't think I'd keep everything, she said as she opened the top box. She laid out printed bank transfers, wire approvals, spreadsheets with my name logged next to every transaction that mattered. Each page was like a breadcrumb trail leading back to the work I'd done. Then she handed me a separate folder. "It's from last March," she said. "Alzina sent this to Marcellus." The email was simple but devastating. "If she doesn't sign by May, we move without her, erase her role in Legacy East. I've already spoken with the PR team." My breath stalled. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a coordinated erasure. I closed the folder, pressed my palm on top of it. They didn't forget me. They plotted. Sidra nodded, her voice soft. "I worked under your mother. She always told me, if anything ever looks off, keep copies, just in case." I looked at her for a long moment. Then I hugged her tightly. "Thank you for keeping me." Once she left, I added the documents to my growing master file. My hands didn't shake this time. Later that afternoon, I got another text. A friend from a women's leadership group. "Hey, this video, isn't that from your panel in Boston?" She sent a link. I clicked. There I was, on stage in 2019, mid-discussion. Except the video was clipped, edited, spliced. My words rearranged to sound arrogant, entitled. They'd stripped the context, trimmed the pauses, and added graphics that painted me as detached from the family. The title of the post, "When Ego Runs the Show." It was making rounds, quietly viral in industry circles. Comments ranged from surprised to smug. A few included screenshots of the Boone podcast, drawing a neat little narrative. Charlotte, the overreaching heir who chose money over kin. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I pulled up the original footage, time-stamped every cut, lined up the distortions, layered proof on top of proof. They didn't just try to remove me, I said to myself. They tried to assassinate my reputation in plain sight. Araminta and I drafted cease and desist letters to every platform and firm that had hosted or distributed the video. We opened a formal digital forensic request. Then I uploaded a statement. Simple, professional, public. I built my name on facts. I intend to protect it the same way. I attached the correct footage, the verifiable documents, the press archives. I didn't plead. I laid out a timeline and told my story with the precision they hadn't expected. Within hours, the post was shared across real estate and legal circles. Quiet, but powerful. Comments started shifting. People I hadn't heard from in years reappeared in my inbox, some apologizing, some offering support, others simply saying, "I believe you." The phrase, "not erased, not owned," took on a life of its own. It was never a slogan. It was a boundary. That night, I sat in the guest house, wine glass untouched beside me, staring at the screen as the messages came in. One was from a former client. "I'll admit, I believed the podcast until I saw your receipts. I'm sorry. Let me know how I can help." Another was from a law school acquaintance offering pro bono counsel for anything I needed. They didn't hurt anymore. They didn't feel like pity. They felt like proof that my voice, quiet as it was, had made it through. "There's a difference between being angry," I whispered, "and being ready." I opened a blank document, titled it Countersuit Prep, and started mapping out every falsehood, every asset manipulated, every defamation opportunity they handed me on a silver platter. I was nearly done when the doorbell rang. No one ever came by unannounced. I opened the door to find no one there, just a yellow envelope on the mat. Inside was a single printed screenshot, group chat messages, clearly taken from someone inside. A small header, "Discredit Strategy, Timeline Talking Points." Alzina's name popped up several times, suggesting spin phrases, scheduling leak dates, coordinating talking heads. At the bottom of the paper was one line, handwritten in neat, slanted script. "They're not done, but neither are you." By sunrise, everything was in motion. I sat in the quiet of my office, guesthouse window cracked, air crisp, with 2 signatures already inked and witnessed. The legal transfer of my assets, every dollar and deed, was now under an irrevocable trust solely in my name. It didn't feel triumphant. It felt like closure. $500 million in equity, property holdings, investment returns, and royalties, untouchable by Marcellus, Alzana, or anyone hiding behind the Boone family crest. I checked my banking dashboard. The green confirmation bar flashed across the screen, followed by a short message from my estate advisor. Trust successfully executed. Protection in place. I exhaled slowly, letting the silence acknowledge it for me. It wasn't about hiding the money. It was about finally owning what was already mine. Next came the communication, a carefully drafted notice to every client, partner, and philanthropic contact I had built relationships with over the years. I kept the tone neutral, direct, and professional. To whom it may concern, effective immediately, all inquiries regarding the DeWitt Trust, its investments, holdings, or project affiliations should be directed to my independent office. I remain the sole legal manager and contributor to these properties. Documentation is attached to confirm the same. Each email carried public records, notarized filings, and scans of previously buried project credits. I didn't have to explain the situation, I just had to state the facts. For a few hours, the replies were quiet. Then came the shift. One by one, messages trickled in. Thank you for the transparency. We suspected something had shifted. Happy to realign our support under your leadership. I had questions. You've answered them better than anyone else could. What followed wasn't applause. It was acknowledgement, respect dressed in discretion. And that was all I needed. By noon, Sidra called. You should know, they're scrambling. Apparently, Marcellus had called a closed-door family gathering in the estate's study. I hadn't been invited, and I didn't need to be. Sidra heard whispers from one of the internal bookkeepers. Assets were unaccounted for, frozen by the court until ownership could be verified. Alzina was livid. Some records didn't match, others couldn't be found at all. Marcellus had told her not to worry, that it would pass, but Alzina had seen the documents. She knew it wouldn't. Later that day, she tried to salvage the damage. She posted a long-winded blog under her name, The Real Story Behind the Boone Realignment. She cited conflicting visions, private disagreements, and discontinued collaboration, but the public records I'd already shared made every sentence look like a cover-up. Old allies began pulling away. They weren't fools. Loyalty bent when legality pressed down hard enough. I watched it all unfold in silence. Let them spin, I muttered, sipping tea. My name is now tethered to facts, not favors. That afternoon, Araminta and I drove downtown and filed the official motion to dissolve all financial and business entanglements between myself and the Boone estate. The file was thick, filled with documentation of forged email threads, misattributed projects, public misrepresentation, and breaches of fiduciary duty. We requested state oversight to review the Boone Family Trust for ethical violations and misuse of authority. This isn't about money, Araminta told the clerk as she handed over the packet. This is about the right to exist, without being rewritten. The clerk looked through the file for a moment before nodding slowly. You've done your homework. There's two, I replied. The judge accepted the motion and signed the discovery request that would compel my father and Alzina to turn over all internal records. There was no running now. Later that evening, a financial law blog picked up the case. The heiress who fought her own legacy was the headline. The article didn't dramatize it. It didn't need to. It told the story exactly as I had built it, with legal clarity and documented proof. I was invited onto a podcast hosted by my old law school's alumni network. We discussed the theft of invisible labor, the erasure of women's roles in legacy wealth, and how silence had been institutionalized into the American family estate structure. My quote that went viral was simple: blood may build bonds, but paper builds proof. That night, I opened my inbox and found it flooded, not from journalists or fans, but from women, strangers, some older, some my age, some from big cities, others from rural towns. They had different stories, but the same wounds. My brother rewrote our inheritance behind my back. My mother left everything to her second husband, erased us. My name was on the deed, until it wasn't. They didn't want me to fix it. They just wanted someone to say, out loud, that it had happened. I read every message. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. But for the first time, I didn't feel alone. This wasn't a victory lap. It was a stance. Later that night, just as I was about to shut my laptop, a final notification popped up. Formal mediation request received from Boone Family Trust, scheduled hearing in 7 days. I didn't flinch. I looked at the ceiling, then whispered to myself, 7 days. That's long enough to finish writing the ending. I woke up to the stillness of my own space. No hallway creaks from someone else's steps. No voices muffled behind closed doors. Just birdsong and the soft whisper of wind moving through leaves. The modest house I had bought after I left the estate wasn't much by Boone standards, but it was clean, quiet, and entirely mine. No one had to approve my name on the deed. No one else's initials appeared on the mailbox. I walked barefoot across the hardwood floors I'd chosen, poured a cup of tea, and looked out the window at the small garden I'd planted weeks ago. The tulips had started to bloom. My calendar on the fridge had appointments only with my name. No board meetings I was expected to attend but never thanked for. No charity appearances I hadn't agreed to. I sat at the table, held the warm mug in both hands, and read the quote etched along the rim. Grace doesn't mean silence. It made me smile. Not wide, not bright, just enough. Today, I finally felt proud without the weight of guilt. That afternoon, I opened the old voice message folder on my phone. I hadn't listened to any of them since I'd moved out. I pressed play. First, Dad's voice. Charlotte, you've got to learn when to stop making everything personal. Next, Alzina's. You overcomplicate things. That's why people hesitate to trust you with decisions. There were more, dozens, all saying different versions of the same thing. I was too much or not enough. But now, they didn't sting. They sounded rehearsed, like lines from a bad script. I didn't feel anger. I felt something quieter. Detachment. They raised me to follow, I thought. I became someone who builds. I deleted every single message. One by one, no hesitation, no tears. It didn't feel like erasure. It felt like balance. When I checked my inbox, there were dozens of new messages, not from lawyers or journalists, but from women. Some were strangers. Others were people I'd met only once at networking events or panels. I saw your court filing. It gave me the courage to confront my brother. My father left everything to my stepmother. I thought it was just me. It's not. You said it out loud. Thank you. A real estate columnist I respected asked to feature me in a new series titled Invisible Architects. I replied to all of them with a simple thank you and shared what I could. But I didn't try to carry their stories. I had enough of my own. Still, knowing they existed, that I wasn't alone, was something. The movement had started. It didn't need me to lead it with a bullhorn. The quiet was doing enough. 2 days before the mediation, I met with Araminta at her office. We reviewed every document, every demand, every line item on our case. She looked at me after the final folder closed. You still sure you don't want more than this? I don't need more, I said. I need it to end correctly. She slid a draft proposal across the table. I've added one final clause. You walk away from all joint claims. In exchange, they issue a public correction and sign a non-disparagement agreement. It was clean, sharp, ironclad. I read it, then nodded. Let them keep the table. I'll keep the blueprints and build my own. She smiled. That's not losing, that's redesigning. We shook on it. Before sunset, I took a small bouquet of lilies and the signed documents to the cemetery. I hadn't been to Mom's grave since last fall. The stone was simple, just like she had asked. No titles. Just her name, her birth and death years, and the phrase she always loved, "What's planted with care cannot be erased." I knelt down, placed the flowers gently beside the headstone, and set the pen I had used to sign my trust deed next to them. Mom, I whispered, I'm not leaving because I lost. I'm leaving because I won, and they don't even know it. There were no tears, just silence. Not the kind I used to swallow, but the kind that feels like exhaling. Grief hadn't made me softer. It had forged the edges I needed. It sharpened what was already unbreakable. As I drove home, the sky turned a warm copper. My phone buzzed just as I passed the old estate gates, now in my rearview mirror. One new message. Boone Trust accepts terms. Public apology pending mediation confirmation. I pulled over, rolled down the window, and let the breeze fill the car. This ends now, I said aloud. On my terms. The mediation room smelled of new carpet and old tension. I stepped inside behind Araminta, our pace measured, matching the tempo of what we came to finish. I wore a navy suit that once belonged to my mother. She always said navy was for women who didn't want to shout to be heard. I didn't need to be loud today. I just needed to be final. Marcellus and Alzena were already seated, flanked by a team of lawyers who looked more bored than concerned, but their eyes betrayed them. The moment I sat down, I saw it. The slight twitch of Marcellus's left hand, the way Alzena avoided eye contact. The mediator, a man with a calm voice and a folder thick with everyone's secrets, began. This session is binding. Both parties will have equal time to present evidence and conditions. Any failure to comply will result in default. Their lawyer started with hollow offers, symbolic gestures, a vague apology, a donation in my name. My silence was louder than any rebuttal. Then came our turn. Araminta opened our evidence file with the gravity of someone unzipping a body bag. She walked through it page by page. Misappropriated funds, fraudulent document edits, timeline discrepancies, public defamation, internal emails, planning my erasure. Then I handed over the final file, confirmation of the trust reallocation, and IRS records cementing my sole ownership of every contested asset. The mediator flipped through the folder. He didn't speak for a long time. His eyes moved from page to page, stopping only to glance briefly at Marcellus. "Were you aware of this pre-existing trust designation?" he asked. Marcellus opened his mouth, then closed it. His jaw flexed. No words came out. That was all the confirmation I needed. Once the silence had done its work, I stood and requested my terms be read into the record. I ask for a formal public apology from the Boone Family Trust, written and verbal. I request full acknowledgement of my foundational role in the projects under dispute. I require in writing that my name no longer be used in any branding, legal, or promotional language associated with the trust. Alzena scoffed. "You think this gives you power?" I leaned in slightly and whispered, just for her. "No, this proves I never lost it." The mediator turned to them. "If you decline these terms, the next step is discovery in open court. Depositions, public record. Are you prepared for that?" Silence. I straightened. "This isn't revenge. It's realignment." 2 hours later, the papers were signed. When it was over, I shook hands with the mediator. Not Marcellus. Not Alzena. I walked past them without a glance. Outside, the courthouse steps were lined with a few local reporters. Microphones hovered, voices called my name. One asked, "Anything you want to say to the Boone family?" I turned toward them, posture steady. "I was told I was just a tenant," I said. "But tenants don't design the house." I did. And now, I own mine. The clip aired that night. The quote was shared, replayed, copied into newsletters and podcasts. And I went home. Not to the guest house, to the home I had bought, renovated, and named myself. Days later, I sat in my new office, sunlight falling across the desk, walls lined with framed blueprints, not of old houses, but of new plans, the kind I would build on my terms. The Architects Trust had launched that morning, a nonprofit for women pushed out of family wealth structures. Our mission? Help them take it back, with paperwork, with legal counsel, with proof. I signed the first 20 grants myself, funding new housing for women who were told they didn't belong in the very places they built. The photos of my old family weren't anywhere on the walls, but the records of my work were. I recorded a short message for the foundation's site. What we lose when we're erased is not memory, it's voice. So I made sure mine couldn't be silenced again. That evening, I received one last email. Subject: Final Settlement Notice. Boone Family Trust. Content: Correction letter approved. Public apology scheduled. File closed. I clicked Archive. Then I smiled and said, just above a whisper, and that's the last time they'll ever own a word of mine.